Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're at in the world. Once again, we are live with Appalachia Technologies, and I'm extremely proud to do today's webinar. And fortunately, I get to bring on a whole bunch of guests today. And what we're going to be talking about today are not tons of new shiny objects that you should be putting into place, but today we're going to be talking about cybersecurity resolutions that you might want to consider ditching by March. So we're kind of flipping it a little bit today. But once again, thank you all for tuning in. This is one that I've been excited about. I hope that your New Year's are going well so far, and really happy to have you here. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up Ashley Loudon. Ashley is our marketing manager, and she's the one typically behind the scenes really helping us put these webinars together. And she's the one pushing all the buttons in the background to make everything work and so on. So Ashley, how are you doing?
I am awesome. How are you, Mike?
Fantastic. It's great to see you. It's crazy that we're already near the end of January. Like, it's nuts. I feel like I was just watching the ball drop in New York. It's crazy.
January flew.
It sure did. It sure did. You're exactly right. So we have an exciting show. Why don't you tell us about it?
You gave a great intro. I think probably the last thing that any of us need to hear in January is all the things we should be doing. We individually all have lists that are long enough. So this is more about having caution in some of these wonderful full steam ahead initiatives that happen at the beginning of the year, and more so highlighting the risks that can happen when you abandon these along the way. So if you don't mind, should we bring the rest of the crew up?
I think it's time. What do you think? Do you want to one at a time, or how do you want to do this? How do you want
let's just bring them all up at once.
Do it. All right. Let's not keep them back there.
There we go. We've got Jimmy, Yoel, and everybody give a really warm welcome. Not that we can hear you anyway. Warm welcome to Brian Bronstein, who's going to be a new face that you'll be seeing frequently. Mike with the audio effects.
I got new buttons today, Ashley.
I love it. So as we're gathering here, if you want to drop us, I think like 2/3 of the country has been hit with all of this weather. I actually made it into the office this morning here in central Pennsylvania. We had somewhere between 8 to 10 inches. So if you got any kind of snow, why don't you just drop into the chat what you ended up encountering? Jimmy was telling us that he's feeling a little bit sore these days because you're the one that plays dodgeball and does all of these group sports. So if you're feeling sore, then let's not talk about how I'm feeling. So like I said to the audience, guys, we're talking about the things, not the things that you should be starting, but what happens when you start, don't finish, and you just kind of move on. So there are some things that are safe to pause, and then there are other things that actually present more danger by getting that kind of stop-start motion. I read something recently that was talking about the threats that are coming in 2026 that we're going to see. They're nothing new. If you look at any of the lists that have been coming through over the last 5, maybe even 10 years, they just kind of jockey position most of the time. But what is amplifying is the way that they scale. So, Jimmy, what do you think about that? You know, you're one of our vCISOs. You're in there. You're GRC manager. You're working with our clients a lot to help navigate some of these threats. So do you agree with that? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think for a lot of organizations, there's nothing really novel. There's nothing really new. I do think everything kind of just jockeys for position. And I think that has a lot to do with the technology that a lot of industries are implementing. And the technology stack doesn't really shift all that much. But I do think one of the big things to keep in mind is what your technology stack is today. And then keeping in mind what is most vulnerable to you, because different industries tend to look pretty similar amongst their own pillars, right? Different companies and different industries tend to look kind of similar to each other. I think they tend to face most very similar threats. And a lot of it is data centric, right? So I think a lot of the risks basically stay the same. It's just different technology may adjust how you're controlling or enforcing or reducing the risk. But in terms of vulnerabilities, yeah, I think a lot of them just jockey for position, and I think that depends on the technology that people are implementing.
Yeah. Hey, Brian, what do you think? Is this more of a tech gap or is it more of a strategy failure?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. I agree. I don't think that the bad guys are necessarily getting better. They're just getting faster. They've got AI available now. And so, rather than potentially trying to brute force an account or two, they're hitting 10,000 in a shot, right? So it's just the blast radius is bigger, but the same threats exist.
Yeah, and to add to that, they're getting more pointed too. So if they want to have a bigger blast radius, they can, but they can also get more pointed more quickly because all of their intelligence gathering is automated, right? So web scrapers and all that type of stuff to understand who the particular people are to target. If they want to make it targeted, if they want to do some sort of spear phishing or vishing or whatever the fun terminology is nowadays, I think they can get more targeted more quickly with a lot of that stuff too.
So pretty much those of you who are in charge of security for your organization, your 2025 heartburn is your 2026 heartburn, just a little bigger. So Yuval, when an organization starts a security initiative, and they drop it quickly, when does that actually increase the risk?
I think I will start with that initiative that you're bringing in, right? How many business processes are you affecting? How disruptive is it going to be? And then long term, how does it look if you're dependent on those processes to start with, right? If you're doing the diligence ahead of time, those risks, bringing it in, right? Say you're going from on-prem to the cloud, or you're doing cloud to on-prem, which is happening a lot now these days. As you're moving in that very fine line of bringing everything down and breaking and not knowing how to fix it to the extent of the other risks, the biggest one to highlight is, again, how disruptive is this going to be? And if you haven't done the test ahead of time, I think that's a good pause moment to bring other parties in to help you at least address that answer. How often do we go back to tables with tentative solutions being brought, and they sound really good on paper? But when you bring someone experienced that has done some of it in the past and they talk openly, it's always like, yeah, we were down for 2 or 3 hours. We were down for a day. We were down for a month. And then the recovery effort, it's actually outweighing the benefits of said solution being implemented. Giving you a more clear example, I have seen new antiviruses or new advanced protecting solutions being brought into organizations that are as disruptive as the virus itself. They have applications that stop running. They have processes behind the scenes on said devices that stop running. And it's unfortunate, but we see it happen so often that it's the most clear example I can give you. So how do we pause? Test it, make sure it works. And then if it doesn't break, then go slowly, pilot the things before you do a full-blown implementation on any of it.
I'm going to piggyback off that a little bit. I think many times, if you're looking at an organization setting up new tools, we're 2026 is rolling around. We have all these new tools that we're going to implement. Well, many times as these tools are in, development or in staging environments, we're pouring in all of this data and all of this information. Well, many times those systems aren't really tightened down until right before they go into production. But if they're never going into production, or if we're behind on those, they haven't been tightened down. So we have all of that new data or all of that old data sitting in these systems just there, for possibly anybody to access because things haven't really have been configured properly, or there's been no audits done on those systems. So there comes a point where you're 2, 3, 4 months into a project and you're just dumping all of this information that it's become a risk because this isn't completed. We haven't had an audit on it, and it's not ready to go, but the data is still sitting there.
And I kind of want to piggyback off that too a little bit. And Ash, one of the questions that you asked is, like, when is it just wasted effort? And what that makes me think of is, we were talking backstage, right, about some of my previous experiences, and like seeing the new buzzword, right, and then kind of adjusting resources and going to the next big thing. I think it's most impactful when it's not a risk-based decision, right? If you're doing an effort because you think you should versus it actually being correlated and solving or mitigating a risk that you have, or stopping something that is a critical or high risk that you started to do because you wanted to mitigate that risk. If you just pause and move off of it, if the risk still exists, that immediately just opens up your organization to more risk, right? Or the risk stays the same at least and isn't being mitigated based off of your roadmap. So I think it's most impactful when you're not doing something risk-based or a decision that's risk-based. That's kind of what I think of when I think of like wasted resources or something that is impactful.
Thank you for teeing that up. You don't realize that you did this, but so you guys all work and consult and assist people in your vCISO positions. So you're working with people who are having to communicate to executives or others who may not have the same perspective. They might not have the same motivators and goals. They may be the ones who have come back from a conference and they've heard something or they read a report and they want to shift gears. So for those who are watching and joining us today, how do you keep your team focused on the initiatives that you set out to conquer in 2026 when you're getting pulled at resources being your human element, your time, your budgets, because we know that things will come up. So how do you keep your foot on the gas?
I'll go. As we think about it, because this is such a good question, right? I'm going to give you an example that as I saw some of that live, because I talked to two team members that face the same thing, right? They were hiring some talent. One of them happened to be selling some of the efforts behind applying for the position. Let me elaborate. This was actually a threat actor from a different country that paid an individual, US-based individual, to impersonate the person applying for the job. Interview went well. All the items were actually in line with the level of skills and stuff. As soon as, hey, we're going to send you the device for you to start working, the device actually went to South Korea. You see where I'm going with it? So the hiring process and the risks are way far beyond the effort of, I'm going to do a background check. I'm going to interview you in person. I'm going to do some research on your level of skills, do some reference checks. That is example number one. It happened to a well-known training platform. I met an individual from that platform that they elaborate a little bit more on the effort. It was cut early on, but it went as far as. The other example is for developers. Developers are basically sitting worldwide, everywhere. And the example of hiring that person went through an agency, a staffing agency, and then the staffing agency is in charge of doing the background, the check, the references, everything. Yet when that person was hired in, they couldn't get a hold on the physical aspect of it or the person. And it also someone from Iran, a whole different, can of worms open after that. So when we are facing that level of hiring and that appetite for growth, sometimes it affects that level of depth of risks that we didn't even account for. I have been running incident response training for a long time, and we haven't had one of those scenarios covered in any of them. One is appetite. Oh, we're fine. We do our due diligence. We know who we're hiring. But when I bring it up, there's always the aspect of like, how would you know? These are employees delivering. These are people doing what they're supposed to do, really smart people. So the outcomes are what you expect of an employee, yet the risk is that person is stealing as much data as possible to do who knows what with it. So it's kind of like going around your question, but to give you context on how some of these risks materialize at that level.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing is communication, right? I know at least internally at Appalachia, right, we have we kind of have one major thing that we focus on every year, right? I think we have a roadmap that we work on, but we have overall goals, overall themes to every year broken down to quarters. I think a lot of it goes back to communication, like how to keep your foot on the gas it's communicating both upward and down to your people, making sure that they're focused on the right things and making sure those things relate to the roadmap that is hopefully created. And hopefully, again, going back, not to sound like I'm repeating myself, but risk-based, right? The roadmap was created for a reason. There are things that your organization should do for a reason, making sure that resources are focused on those overarching goals. And obviously, things change, right? The environment is fluid. It kind of shifts back and forth. But the roadmap itself should be kind of the goal of the organization. So keeping everybody focused should be a communication for the leadership and making sure those things are being tackled, right? Whether you're setting KPIs or OKRs, all the great business acronyms, whether you're setting those, it's just a matter of communicating and resource planning.
Now we're going to come back to how do you shift gears safely in a little bit, but let's hit up a couple of things on the list that may be one of those. It's my project for this year that you don't want to stall on as we keep going. So, for example, identity and access management. When is that more dangerous to start and stop? Like if you get halfway through cleaning,
that's a big one, right? I mean, identity is mission critical, right? And so if you've got to have a goalpost to find if you're going to get into a project like that. Any change to identity, that's production, live defense level stuff. I guess if you don't start it, you have a more predictable risk. You already kind of understand where you're at. But when you start down the path of changing it without reassessing all the changes you've made, you might have some new risk on the table if you were to pause it and not push all the way through. You know what I'm saying? You could potentially introduce a lot of new gaps if you don't clean it up and close the project out properly.
Yeah, it's a good point to ponder as well. Of if that was the plan that you were going to take it to completion, and the assumption across the organization is that it was completed, but it was only partially done. How do you keep everybody on the same page if everybody has this false sense of security that start to finish, this thing is handled, it's good until review for next year? How risky is that? And it goes back to Jimmy, what you were saying about communicating within the organization. Everybody has to be on the same page. These are the things that we're doing, and this is the status, even if it means the status got paused.
I would love to expand a little bit on that one. And I'm sharing another story. I have had executives at the C-level push to switch from a Google environment to a Microsoft because they wanted Outlook. And when they say, I want Outlook because that's what I'm used to play with, I hate Gmail, I'm only naming names here, right? And when you try to explain how involving that experience is, single sign-on, identity management, apps, environments, everything that you have to switch to be able to enable that one person's wish, you have to really know how to explain it at a C-level first. Because you're saying no to a person that is a decision maker way above your pay grade, but at the same time, the impact of said requests. How do we make that happen? How do we give you something that works for you, but at the same time, something that has a larger impact? And we name the risks, right? And I can confidently tell you that you might lose that battle. They can still get away and you will have to re-implement or reinvent the whole environment. But you have to know how to explain it at the level. And then you mentioned identity and access management. The same goes for some executives that bring up these new solutions. Hey, I want to play with so solution. If you have an ideal environment where you have total control of the identity and access management, you can make it part of your single sign-on, and you're going to be able to protect whatever they want to play with. But it shouldn't be the other way around. It's not because you bring this new solution and shiny, I should reinvent my whole identity and management system to accommodate the one. So what's the final goal? Are we trying to enable something that works for regardless of what solution we bring in? Or are we changing the whole environment because of an individual's wish? using an app or a system or so.
So the theme keeps coming back to communication, right? It seems to be the theme, because if you go in and you try to communicate technically about that to the board level or the stakeholders, they're not going to understand that. So you have to be able to, when they have those requests, you're going to have to be able to explain, the things that need put in place or that aren't ready, for those things to happen.
Communication is key. I got it, right?
Always, yep.
Yeah, I think another thing too, Ray, if you think about it, how many clients have we gone to, or how many organizations have we talked to? How many of them have sat there and said, oh, we're tapped out on resources. We have plenty of resources to be able to do whatever project, right? I don't think I've ever heard that, ever, like walking into an organization. So I think another thing to keep in mind is if you're going to stop something, you only have a finite amount of resources to be able to, pause and move off of. A lot of times it's not just, oh, they can keep going. Or if you reduce the staff by half focusing on that, the progress is going to be a lot slower. I think people really need to think about resource impact when they're going to be shifting priorities. And if you're focusing them on one thing, they're not focusing on another most of the time. And you can't just keep adding to the pile, right? I love to use the analogy like you're doing Thanksgiving dinner, right? You can only have one plate, right? Now you can go get seconds, right? I love me some seconds at Thanksgiving, but you can only really get one plate, and the one plate you can only really fill so much. You keep adding to it, it's going to overflow, and you're not going to be able to get through it. And that's it to me. When I think about resources and stopping, I think a lot of it has to do with that resource impact.
So
Yes.
Jimmy, go ahead, Ash.
Well, it sounds like a good question to pose if you're the person who's faced with some of these. Hey, let's shift gears. It sounds like a good question to pose back to that person is, what project are we comfortable stopping? What budget needs to get shifted? What resource, what that's in flow can we put on hold? Because unless we're planning on making another hire or that money tree is further ahead than we all thought, something's got to give, right?
You're going to make them stop in their tracks and think about it for a second, for sure.
What I was going to mention to the line, Mike and Ash, is the following. As a manager, as a leader, someone that has a few people working under you or reporting to you, you're not going to be micromanaging them. You're not going to be able to do their job. So it's impossible for you to know all the avenues and things could go wrong, right? You can only provide so much visibility into these issues. And an exercise that I used to play, and I haven't in a minute, but it's still in my book to play, is I always challenge them with, what if we start from scratch? What if you had the opportunity to reinvent this whole process? What would it look like? Can you just pitch me that? Don't worry about the roadblocks. Don't worry about the issues that we have today, the challenges we're facing. If you were to make this brand new for this organization, what does it look like? And you'd be surprised how many great ideas come out of that. And then we can find a common ground between the two to make it work. But the one I want to get to is, have you tried playing that on an executive level, at the decision-making level? And have you ran through the exercises as, if you were to start from scratch, this is what it would look like? But again, that's an ideal environment. I'm going to give you an example. We don't have to worry about data from yesterday. We're starting fresh today. Brand new systems in the cloud. We're going to stop everything data center-wise. This is what it would look like. Now, what I just said, if you were to do it in a second, everything breaks, everything disrupts. Now, if you expand that time frame, say, give me a year and I can make it happen. You have to play with the year. So a good time to stop and pause is going to be when the request has to have an immediate result. I want this done by yesterday. I'm like, I could do it. It's going to be disruptive. If you give me 6 months, this is the result I can give you. And that's an answer that helps you not only pause some initiatives, but let me tell you, when you are given that breathing room to go back and really assess some of the risk, you might have the opportunity to pull a stall set efforts because you now have more information. You have time to go back and do some homework around it, get more evidence, and then get the answers that maybe the decision makers are trying to get.
always have so much good knowledge, y'all. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
With your Miami Vice jacket. Now, here's another one that might on the surface feel like it's less disruptive. How about incident response plans, IRPs? There's a plan of action, right? It's so that everybody's on the same page. And it may feel like, well, that's not making changes to our infrastructure. So what is the actual risk of partially doing an IRP?
Depends on what's partially done and what's not done. I mean,
What's worst case, best case?
Oh, I mean, worst case is not having decision makers documented, not having any sort of plan of action. You kind of just have a template with a lot of fill in the blank person does this, right? Or something like that. And it's like you get to a point and you're just like, well, do I go to Brian with this? Do I go to Yoel with this? Do I go to Mike with this? Ash, do I come to you with this? Whose approval do I need? And then the whole point of an IRP, or at least one of the major points of an IRP, is to make things a lot more efficient, right? To save time, right? Because time is money. Business downtime is money, right? So the whole point of an IRP, or at least again, a big point of it, is to streamline a lot of that and make it very simple and very fast to recover. If you have half of that missing, or whatever the partial means, right? If you have 30% of that missing, depending on what's missing, could cause a lot of downtime. Chasing down people to get communication, building templates to send out to people, notifying them of certain activities that are occurring. You could have SOPs that aren't created that are attached to the IRP, and technical folks may not know what needs to be done to be able to bring systems back up, right? Or it just really depends on the partial of what's not done. But I mean, it could effectively mean that it may be worse than if you ever had one to begin with, because you have a lot of decision paralysis of who are we supposed to go to. This document says something, but it's not complete, right? That would be a very annoying one for me if someone came to me and we were creating an IRP and they said, stop, let's keep it as is. Let's not move any further. And it's like, it's half baked. It's not even usable at that point. I would say if you have to do an IRP, you don't have one.
Yeah, I think the big one for me when I look at an incomplete IRP is maybe something that was mentioned earlier, right? You're back to that kind of false confidence scenario where if you've got folks who are in charge asking where it's at, and you say it's in process, or we're working on this, and you get about midway through and you don't finish this, if there wasn't good communication about the fact that it's not being actively worked on, or that we haven't finished it, you've got folks thinking this is handled, this is taken care of, we don't need to worry about it. And because incident response is not something you really think about daily, by the time it rolls around, you need that plan and it's not done, it's way too late.
Can you imagine how that plays out if you end up in a breach situation, a security situation, and you go to your cyber insurance company and you say, here's our IRP, and they look at it and they say, where's the rest? That's a tough conversation.
Yeah, well, your question of have you thought of it? Yeah. Or do you want to think of it? No, not without my blood pressure going up.
Well, when we talk about communication and transparency, if you have half of an IRP, your stakeholders need to be aware of that, right? Because there's something that we need to pause so that we can go back and finish that up, because that is definitely one of the most important pieces, for business continuity, period.
Yeah, and I've seen it in a lot of organizations, and in talking to a lot of boards, a lot of C-suites, over the past 10 years. I think non-technical people think IT is some sort of magic, right? You kind of like, hey, we have this problem. Oh, IT is going to snap their fingers and it's going to be done, right? It's just, that's not how that works. There's a lot of planning involved, user impact to think about, testing that needs to be done, documentation, all that type of stuff, right? So I think sometimes when non-technical people think about, oh, we're going to create an incident response plan, they think it's done already, right? And yeah, a lot of us have in our head what we think what needs to be done, but that doesn't mean the entire organization, depending on the size of it, how many stakeholders you have, they don't all have the same plan in their head, and that can be risky. Not everybody's in the same boat, but they're not rowing the same direction, if that makes sense. Having an IRP helps that everybody row in the same direction.
And time is of the essence. If you have an incident, if something's going on, you can't all be sitting around thinking that Joe's the one that was doing the work or is taking point on it. So, Jimmy, it sounds like if nothing else, you need to have the responsible parties assigned. So, this is going down. You're the person who takes the lead. What the lead means in that may be question mark. Ideally, none of these things would be half-baked projects, right? But if you at least know who the responsible party is, who's the decision maker, who's the team, then you can keep the momentum and keep that action moving in those really critical times.
100%. Yeah. Who's responsible for what? Who's doing what? Who's the incident commander? Who's communicating upwards? Who's communicating downwards, horizontally, whichever way, right? Who's sending communication to whoever stakeholder that they need to send communication to? What does that communication look like? What do they need to communicate? And when do you bring in your cyber insurance? And those are probably some of the big hitters. What tools do you need? Where are you going to look for the data? Those are kind of secondary items because, tech people typically know that, but it's good to document it anyway. But who's responsible for what? Who has the power to make decisions is very big. Because like you said, time is of the essence. Going back to the boat analogy, if I think Brian's, has the pail and he's, getting water out of the boat, but Brian thinks Yoel's doing it and Yoel thinks I'm doing it and we all have a paddle, well, the boat's sinking. Yeah, and no one's bailing water. So if it's documented who's responsible for what and when, I think that at least gets you to a starting point where, most times you're going to be rowing in the same direction.
This is probably a good time for me to share. We're going to share a link if you feel like your security program needs a bit of a review. We're going to share a link to it's a self-guided security assessment. It's a great starting point if you haven't done one of those in a little bit, and you just kind of need a bit of a view of where are we at with some of the high level. Nothing's going to take the place of going in depth with someone as a third party who's going to come in with fresh eyes looking at your organization. But we're going to share that link here shortly. Let's shift gears. So we're talking about the things that you probably shouldn't pause. What are some things that, priorities change, you need to free up resource? What are some things that you can safely put a pause on, or safely/easily put a pause on?
I can start on that one. It's something that we see often taking place, regardless of the size of the organization, and it's tracking your compliance on, I want to say, siloed documents. Think of a spreadsheet, or think of a local file storage for evidence, or think of someone's email that has like no retention policy. And what we see when compliance is tracked at that level is everybody's responsibility and no one's, right? Because it just goes to whatever the latest meeting is. And yeah, we have it, but no one took the time to go back and really confirm it existed. So yeah, it is time to start tracking your compliance on those one-off solutions that don't really get you anywhere, and start thinking about consolidating all of that behind a proper GRC or governance risk and compliance tool that not only helps you bring all of that effort into a platform that you can audit and be consistent, it gives a lot more people eyes and visibility into what is actually done. And by the way, you can have your incident response plan built into that GRC platform too, because it's a good placeholder for it. At the same time, I think that if you were to transfer some of that knowledge, you have to have set parties that we discussed involved in. So yeah, part ways with the old ways of tracking, I want to say compliance and risk in general, and embrace a more consolidated, I want to say concise and precise is the right word I was looking for, tracking mechanism.
What are some other things that if you needed to, I see Jimmy, there you go.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, right? Like it's really difficult to come with a high level thing that you can safely pause, right? I think everything comes with a huge asterisk. Have a risk-based decision. I don't know all the organizations that are watching. I don't know what your risk register looks like. I don't know what things that you have going on as it pertains to those things. So I can't really give that. But blindly thinking, um, I've seen a lot of organizations have vendor risk management and they send out vendor reviews, but they don't have a way to associate the criticality of the vendor itself. So they just say, we have 1,000 vendors that we deal with, right? And they're sending vendor requests or third-party vendor risk assessments, right? They're sending third-party vendor risk assessments to every single one of those 1,000 vendors. But then when you look at the list, sometimes there's vendors on there where I'm looking at the list. I'm like, you don't need to assess these people. Right? You don't need to assess this organization, which means that you are requiring them to do work. You're requiring someone on your staff to do work to assess certain organizations when it isn't impactful either way. They don't handle sensitive data or have access into your environment. I've seen a couple of those. So in terms of safely pausing doesn't mean quitting, but in terms of safely pausing, I would say pause until you have some sort of way to assess the criticality of the vendors that you are assessing, and then restart with that methodology in mind.
Yeah, I agree. It is. It's hard to think from a security perspective of what's an okay to pause type of project. But I guess if you look at something in terms of what does it touch or what's its impact, or it's anything real low impact, maybe non-production, like, oh, we're gonna increase some logging on some servers. That's pretty low impact. Maybe some internal housekeeping type of stuff. We've got to get our documentation up to par. Let's be honest, most organizations should probably start there anyway, because your documentation is probably already a little lacking. Rather than maybe going and demoing a shiny new tool. Let's get documentation in order. Let's make sure everything's up to date. I'd say it's really hard to look at a lot of the different types of projects that people might jump into this year and say, hey, that's one that's okay if you don't really finish it. You're probably better off looking at a project and maybe breaking it down, making it a little more modular, and you can actually maybe build in, if you know a project's going to be really large and it's going to take all my resources, it's going to take an extended amount of time, maybe build in some safe to pause points where you go, okay, instead of taking this as one big kind of 9-month project, let's break it into like 4 little 2 or 3 month projects that have a definitive closure point. We can stop if we have to pivot at some point because something's taking more priority. You can reallocate some of your resources and safely step away and say, okay, well, we've hit that milestone. We're good. We can close that mini project off, and we'll pick it back up when resources allow. Yeah.
I love that, Brian. And for my simple mind, it reminds me of if you've ever gone into I'm going to clean up my closet project and you tear everything out, and then 10 o'clock at night rolls around and you just want to climb in your bed and your bed's covered. Like you didn't give yourself little checkpoints along the way where you could safely stop that one, huh?
I'll be back there and just say it. You're right. It's pausing the thought of the new shiny object this year and really looking at your inventory, looking at your resources, and looking at what you already have in place. There's a good chance you already have the tools there. They're just not built out, or maybe you haven't assigned a proper resource to it who has dedicated the appropriate time. So just pause the new, shiny object syndrome and really take a look at what you have and finish those out.
I have an example I want to share. I didn't know that one of the comments is talking about impact of AI, but I'm going to use that to really have a quick assessment, right? Say you are halfway there through implementation of a sensitive system. Yet there's a new one that should be completed right after that has a larger impact. And I'm using AI as an example because it's everywhere right now. Maybe it is the time to say, maybe we should pause this one that we're doing now because there's an AI implementation down the line that might have an impact. I'm going to give you an example. ERP solutions for larger organizations have somewhat of a component of AI built in right now. And maybe the solutions you were looking to buy licenses for everyone, ChatGPT or whatever the next version is, you don't have to. So you can pause that project because everything you need to accomplish is going to be on the implementation of the next solution that is already scheduled to begin, right? That type of assessment is something I'm really proud of because we are doing it through workshops that we normally have that we come in and help organizations build a path and a strategy around it. But what I'm trying to get is it is not just about, you mentioned the shiny toy, is what else are we implemented that could have actually a better solution, more built-in type of capability rather than having another siloed application just lingering out there.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, UL. We're getting close to the end here. So before I head out with the last kind of question for the team here, we do monthly webinars. So I added into the chat, if you're interested in getting notified when these webinars come up, please go ahead and join that for notifications on webinars and events. The next one is in February 19th. It is going to be on PCI. So if PCI is something that impacts you and your organization, Mike and UL will be leading that one. We'll be digging into that. So as a final parting words, parting thoughts to someone, if there's something that you could recommend from your point of view, something that you can do differently in 2026 as a leader, as a leader who's responsible for the security of your organization, what should they stop starting? All smiles and nods, like, okay, you're paring down your list. Just give me one.
Overall, I think this goes back to a lot of what we talked about, right? Stop starting anything that isn't like you don't have something on or a risk-based decision, right? It's not on the risk register. Don't start something if it's just a buzzword just because you want to do it. It's impactful to your resources. It's impactful to your, like the basics of your organization, the core stuff that you do, right? It takes focus away from that. I think that the best thing to do is just take a pause and stop implementing the buzzwords just for the sake of the buzzwords. It's half the time the cybersecurity community can't even agree on what the buzzword means. So I would say put a pause on that until you understand what it means to your organization, and then you have an actual plan in place to implement it.
I'm going to go next. Pause growth. You're not ready for the scale of the new phase. And I know that sounds counterproductive for organizations looking to, increase revenue, increase their impact, get a better footprint in certain areas. And I've seen that played out in terms of risk. Organizations growing and bringing in like small shops added to their bigger platform. And then when you bring those that didn't have the hygiene or didn't have the actual cybersecurity to help behind the scenes, you bring a lot of those already impacted systems into your environment. So before you grow to the point that you haven't assessed if your capabilities today are able to scale up to that level, this is a very good executive type of meeting that you want to say, hey, before we go there, first, our systems are not capable of handling that level of growth. So either we implement a system ahead of the growth, or we're going to have one go at the same time as we already had the growth. And I know it sounds kind of like repetitive in terms of, well, which one should I go first? We need the growth to be able to afford like a corporate level solution. Maybe it's the other way around. You should be able to prepare for that ahead of time. And of course, it's going to be smooth sailing, never, but it's at least going to be setting you up for success rather than going back to your IT guys and, hey, we need a new ERP solution because we're twice the size. How do we do it? And of course, we know how it goes.
Yeah. I think stop starting shiny new demos of products you saw at a conference. That's what we were talking about earlier. It's most of the time you don't even need it, and the chances that you are going to get it fully rolled out are slim. You're better off going through and reviewing your existing policies, tighten those up, finish your documentation, maybe do a little bit of a gap assessment internally. You'll get far more value out of that exercise than trying to implement some new product you don't need.
take a deep breath and take yourself up to 30,000 feet and look down at your overall security posture and how your resources are being used, your people, your money, all of those things. Are we working on a project that we started 2 years ago that solution doesn't even do the job anymore, right? So it's getting rid of the shiny objects, say no to demos, like Brian said. That's great because we all get that stuff every day, and just looking down from 30,000 feet at the overall picture. Don't get caught up in the day-to-day grinding. You got to take a step back because sometimes the ship gets misaligned, right? And even if it's misaligned by 2 degrees, in the long run, that's going to put you way off the map. So you have to take a step. You have to, take a step up and realign that ship to make sure it's going the way that it needs to go.
Done is better than started, right?
Absolutely.
We could probably, someone will want to debate that one, but we're at time. So Mike, Jimmy, Yovel, and Brian, thank you guys so much for your time. Thank you to everybody who joined us. The next webinar, February 19th, is going to be on PCI. The link's in the chat. Also, if you're interested in that self-guided security assessment, the link is in the chat for that as well. And as always, if you have additional questions, need help, any of these guys are on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn as well, and I can connect you with these guys. And Appalachia Technologies, we're here in Central PA, looking to help organizations if you need. For those of you who are local to us, hope to see a bunch of you at tomorrow's AI meetup. And until then, stay safe, stay warm, look out for each other, and be good humans. Thanks all.
Thanks,
Take care.
Thank you.